Ha, I can't do that. My husband would kill me if he found out.
That was the message I saw pop up on my wife's smartwatch while she was passed out drunk on the couch.
My wife, Jessica. My wife.
And the message was from Tom, someone I'd known for years. A guy I played soccer with, grabbed beers with, the whole deal. My gut twisted instantly, like I'd been punched.
This wasn't some random text.
This was my wife, flirting with a guy I thought was a friend, talking about things I never thought I'd see her talk about.
I don't know what hit me harder, the fact that it was her, or the fact that it was him.
I stood there, frozen for a second, just staring at the message like it was some sort of sick joke.
I had to know more.
So, I swiped up, scrolled back through their conversation, and what I found. It was way worse than I expected.
Flirting. Suggestive messages.
Late-night chats about how they always felt something but never acted on it.
Jessica asking Tom when they could meet up, alone.
My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I'd never felt rage like this before, pure, cold, shaking rage.
The kind that makes you see red and forget what you're doing. And yet, I kept scrolling.
Every new message was like a fresh stab in the gut.
How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Hell, maybe longer.
She was practically throwing herself at him, and he wasn't exactly resisting. I wanted to wake her up right then and there.
Shake her until she gave me an explanation. But what was I going to say?
Hey, babe, saw your little love notes to Tom while you were passed out drunk.
Care to explain?
No, I needed to calm down and think.
But how do you calm down after reading something like that?
I put her smartwatch back on her wrist, like nothing happened. She didn't stir, completely oblivious to the disaster waiting to hit her.
I didn't sleep that night. How could I?
My mind raced, replaying every moment of our marriage, every look she'd given me, every kiss, every I love you she'd ever said.
Was any of it real? Or had I been some clueless idiot all along? One thing was clear, I needed to know everything. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck.
I hadn't slept at all, and every time I tried to close my eyes, that damn message flashed through my mind. I was lying there on the couch, staring up at the ceiling, wondering how I was going to get through the day. Jessica was still asleep, dead to the world after downing 2 bottles of wine, blissfully unaware that everything was about to change. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the tension in the air. Normally, Saturday mornings were when Jessica and I would have coffee together, maybe take the kids out to the park or run errands. But today, all I could think about was her smartwatch and those filthy messages. Every time I thought about them, I could feel my blood boiling again. I didn't even know if I wanted to confront her yet.
I needed more. I needed to be sure. That's when it hit me, her phone.
She always kept it close, but last night, she'd been so drunk that she'd left it in the den.
If I could get into her phone, I'd know everything.
I'd see the whole story, not just the snippets I saw on her watch.
I sat up, feeling a rush of adrenaline.
This was my chance. I got up as quietly as I could and made my way to the den, where her phone was sitting on the coffee table. It was almost surreal, how ordinary it looked, just lying there.
Like nothing was wrong. Like it wasn't the key to blowing up our entire marriage.
I grabbed it, my hands shaking a little, and tried to unlock it.
No luck.
She had a passcode, of course.
I cursed under my breath. I didn't know it, but I had a good guess. Jessica wasn't the most imaginative when it came to passwords.
I tried her birthday.
Nope. The kids' birthdays? Still no.
Then I remembered her old phone, the one she had before we upgraded. She'd used our anniversary as the code for that one. I punched it in, bingo. The phone unlocked, and I felt a mix of excitement and dread.
Here it was. The proof.
I opened her messages and started scrolling, looking for Tom's name.
It didn't take long to find. The moment I opened their conversation, my stomach dropped. It was worse than I thought. There were texts going back months. Months.
Some of them were just casual, little jokes and inside comments, but a lot of them, well, they weren't casual. The flirting was constant, and it wasn't just her. Tom was right there with her, sending back winks, heart emojis, and comments about how good she looked the last time he saw her.
They'd been talking about meeting up, grabbing drinks, getting alone time.
I scrolled further. There were pictures. Jessica, smiling in ways I hadn't seen her smile in years.
Not just selfies, but suggestive ones, too.
One she had never sent me. I felt sick. Like I'd swallowed something rotten, and it was churning in my gut.
How long had this been going on? How had I not noticed?
But it wasn't just the messages or the pictures that got to me, it was the way she talked to him. She was open with him in a way she hadn't been with me in ages. She talked about her feelings, her frustrations, her desires.
Things she should have been talking to me about.
Instead, she was spilling her heart out to this guy I'd known since high school.
A guy I trusted.
She told him about how things just weren't the same between us, how she felt trapped.
Trapped. That word hit me like a punch to the face. I'd never thought she was unhappy. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but trapped?
I had no idea she felt that way. And instead of coming to me, instead of trying to work on things, she went to him.
I couldn't read anymore.
I slammed the phone down on the table and stormed out of the den, my head spinning.
I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to move, to do something.
I ended up in the garage, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of everything.
Had it all been a lie? Our marriage, our life together? I thought we were solid. I thought we were happy, or at least, fine. But apparently, I was wrong.
Jessica had been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back with someone I'd called a friend.
The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I felt like a fool.
I'd been busting my ass, trying to be a good husband, a good dad, while she was off playing footsie with Tom.
How could she do this to me? How could he do this to me?
I kicked a box in the corner of the garage, sending it flying into the wall. My breathing was ragged, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to break something, to smash everything around me. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the mess I'd made, feeling the rage simmering inside me.
I knew what I had to do.
I had to confront her.
But I wasn't ready yet. I needed more time. I needed to think.
I went back inside, grabbed her phone off the table, and headed upstairs. Jessica was still asleep, snoring softly under the covers, completely oblivious to the storm brewing around her. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her.
I couldn't believe this was my life.
I couldn't believe that the woman I loved, the woman I'd built my life around, was capable of doing something like this.
It felt like I didn't even know her anymore.
But then, as I sat there, watching her sleep, something shifted inside me. The rage didn't go away, but it changed.
It became colder, sharper. I wasn't just angry, I was determined. This wasn't going to break me. This wasn't going to be the end of my story.
If Jessica thought she could lie to me, cheat on me, and walk away without any consequences, she was dead wrong.
I had a plan.
I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I stood up, walked out of the bedroom, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. I needed to clear my head, to figure out my next move. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over.
Not by a long shot.
I made it through the day in a haze. Jessica eventually woke up, none the wiser to what I had uncovered. She staggered into the kitchen mid-morning, looking groggy and slightly embarrassed about how much wine she'd downed the night before. "Morning," she said, rubbing her eyes and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. I flinched at her touch. It felt disgusting, knowing where her mouth had probably been, but I forced a smile and nodded back.
"Morning," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady.
Every word that came out of her mouth sounded fake to me now.
Like everything she said was just another lie. She didn't notice, of course. Jessica never really noticed me anymore.
She poured herself a cup of coffee and started talking about her plans for the day. Something about meeting up with some friends from work, getting her nails done, maybe going shopping. It was all normal stuff, the kind of chatter we'd exchanged a million times before, but now it made my skin crawl. I sat there, sipping my coffee, pretending to listen, but inside I was boiling over. How could she just stand there, casually going on about her day like everything was fine? How could she look me in the eyes and lie to my face? I needed to get out of there before I snapped. "I've got some errands to run," I said, standing up abruptly. "I'll be back later." Jessica just shrugged and nodded, clearly not interested. I grabbed my keys and left without another word, slamming the door harder than I intended. Once I was outside, I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. I needed to keep it together, at least until I had a plan. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head, but all I could think about was what I'd seen on her phone. The messages, the pictures, the way she talked to Tom like he was the most important thing in her life. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time. That she'd probably been lying to me for longer than I even knew. Eventually, I ended up at a park on the edge of town, one of those quiet places people go to when they want to be left alone. I parked the car and sat there, staring at nothing, my mind racing. What was I going to do? How was I going to handle this? I knew I had to confront her. I couldn't just sit back and pretend like everything was fine. But I didn't want to go off half-cocked and make things worse. I needed to stay calm, stay smart. If I just blew up at her, she'd probably lie her way out of it or twist things around to make me the bad guy. So, I waited. I sat there for hours, thinking through every possible scenario. What she'd say, what I'd say, how it would all go down. By the time I finally headed back home, I was ready. Or at least, I thought I was. I pulled into the driveway just as Jessica was getting out of her car, shopping bags in hand. She smiled at me as I got out of the car, like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't sleeping with one of my friends behind my back. "Hey," she said, holding up one of the bags. "I got you something. New shirt for the game next weekend." I could barely look at her. The rage inside me was bubbling up again, threatening to spill over. But I swallowed it down and forced another smile. "Thanks," I muttered. "Looks great." We went inside, and she started unpacking her bags, chatting away about how much fun she had shopping, how she ran into one of her coworkers. I just stood there, watching her, trying to figure out how to start this. I felt like I was watching a stranger, someone who looked like my wife but wasn't her anymore. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Jess," I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "We need to talk." She paused, glancing up at me. "Okay," she said slowly, clearly confused. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know about you and Tom." Her face went pale. The bag slipped out of her hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. What are you talking about?" she stammered, but her voice was shaky, and she couldn't look me in the eye. She knew she was caught. I reached into my pocket and pulled out her phone, tossing it onto the counter between us. "I saw the messages," I said, my voice low and cold. "I saw everything." For a second, I thought she might try to deny it. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but then she just crumpled. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she sank into one of the kitchen chairs, burying her face in her hands. "Oh my God," she sobbed. "Dave, I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything." I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. I wasn't going to let her off that easy. She needed to explain herself. "How long?" I asked quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer right away. She just kept crying, her shoulders shaking, her hands covering her face. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. Just cold, empty anger. Finally, she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "A few months," she choked out. "It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was a stupid mistake." "A mistake?" I shot back,
my voice rising. A mistake is forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning, Jessica. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie to me. You chose to cheat on me. With one of my friends, no less. She flinched at the word cheat, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to understand what she'd done to me. To us. It's not like that, she pleaded. I don't even know how it happened. It just did. We were talking, and it just went too far. I scoffed, shaking my head. Talking? That's what you're going with? You expect me to believe this was just some innocent conversation that got out of hand? You sent him pictures, Jessica. You talked about meeting up with him. How stupid do you think I am? I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. Why? I demanded, slamming my hand down on the counter, making her jump. Why him? Why anyone? Was I not enough for you? Was our life not enough for you? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret, but I didn't care. Regret wasn't going to fix this. Regret wasn't going to take back all the lies, all the betrayal. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, I snapped. You blew up our entire life, Jessica. For what? For some stupid fling with a guy you've known for years? A guy who's supposed to be my friend. She broke down again, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't move. I didn't go to comfort her. I didn't even feel sorry for her. All I felt was a cold, burning anger that refused to go away. Is it still going on? I asked after a long silence. Are you still seeing him? She shook her head quickly, sniffling. No, it's over. I ended it, I swear. I haven't seen him in weeks. And I'm supposed to believe that? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. After all the lies you've told me, I'm supposed to just take your word for it? She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying, looking like a complete mess. But I didn't care. I wasn't the one who needed to feel bad right now. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I needed space, needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I didn't speak to her for days after that confrontation. I couldn't. Just looking at her made me sick to my stomach, and I didn't trust myself not to completely lose it. Jessica had apologized over and over, tried to explain it away as a mistake, a lapse in judgment. She kept insisting it didn't mean anything. But that wasn't good enough. Not for me. I didn't buy it. How could I? Every time she opened her mouth, all I heard were excuses. Pathetic, hollow excuses. The kind you give when you've got nothing left, and you're desperate for a way out. But she wasn't getting a way out. Not this time. So, I planned. While she was at work, I spent hours sitting in my office, piecing everything together. Going through the messages again, documenting everything. I made screenshots of her conversations with Tom. Every flirty text, every photo, every sickening, "Can't wait to see you again, babe." I put it all together in a folder on my laptop. Part of me thought about sending it to Tom's wife, but I wasn't ready for that yet. Not yet. I thought about what she'd done, and I realized there was no way I could just let this go. Even if she was telling the truth and it was over, the damage was done. Jessica had shattered whatever trust we had left. Our marriage was a joke at this point, and I was tired of playing the fool. It wasn't just about the cheating, it was the lying, the disrespect, the fact that she thought she could get away with it. 4 months, she'd been smiling in my face, pretending like everything was normal while she sneaked around behind my back. And for what? Some lowlife who was supposed to be my friend? She didn't deserve the life we built together. Hell, she didn't deserve me. The more I thought about it, the more one thing became crystal clear: she needed to pay for this. She needed to feel what it was like to lose everything. Just like I had. And I wasn't going to just walk away and let her keep pretending like nothing happened. No. I was going to make sure that when I was done, she would regret every single second she'd spent with Tom. So, I started planning my revenge. The first thing I did was lawyer up. Jessica didn't know it yet, but I was already talking to a divorce attorney. I found the best one in town, someone who didn't pull punches and knew exactly how to screw someone over in court. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. I wanted everything lined up before I dropped the bomb on her. While I was handling the legal side, I was also digging into our finances. We had joint accounts, but I had a separate one she didn't know about. I started transferring money little by little, nothing too big that would raise suspicion, but enough that I could get a decent chunk out before she noticed. I wanted to make sure that when it all came crashing down, I wouldn't be left with nothing. But that wasn't enough. No, it wasn't just about the money or the divorce. I wanted to hurt her. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation and betrayal I felt. So, I came up with a way to destroy her reputation, too. Jessica worked in marketing, and her job was all about image. She had a spotless professional reputation, and she prided herself on being this charming, outgoing person that everyone loved to work with. But I knew better. I knew the truth, and I was going to make sure everyone else knew it, too. I took the screenshots I'd gathered and started working on an anonymous email. I wasn't going to send it to just anyone, though. I was going to send it to her boss, her coworkers, her clients, anyone who mattered in her professional life. The email would include every sordid detail, every photo, every flirty message between her and Tom. I'd include just enough to make it clear that she wasn't who she pretended to be. And I'd make sure her career was left in ruins by the time I was done. But before I sent anything, I wanted to get a little more satisfaction. I wanted to watch her squirm. So, I started playing the game. I pretended to forgive her. It wasn't easy, but I acted like I was willing to work things out. That maybe, just maybe, we could move past this. She bought it, of course. Jessica was desperate for things to go back to normal, and she clung to the idea that we could fix our marriage. I played the part well. I smiled, acted like I was letting things go. Even slept in the same bed as her again, though I couldn't bring myself to touch her. The whole time, though, I was waiting for the right moment to strike. And when it came, I wasn't going to hold back. A couple of weeks later, I decided it was time. Jessica was still under the impression that things were getting better. She'd started acting like nothing had happened, like we were just going through a rough patch and working it out. She didn't have a clue what was coming. That Saturday morning, I told her I wanted to have a serious talk. She looked nervous at first, probably thinking I was going to bring up the affair again, but I kept my tone calm. I said I'd been thinking a lot about everything that had happened, and I decided that I needed to move on from the hurt. Jessica looked relieved. She smiled and even reached for my hand, which I let her hold. "I'm so glad you're willing to give us another chance," she said, her voice soft and full of emotion. I nodded. "Yeah, I think we can get past this," I told her. "But there's one thing I need you to do for me." "Anything," she said quickly, eager to please. "What is it?" "I need you to go get your laptop," I said, still keeping my voice calm. "I want to see your work emails." The color drained from her face, and she blinked in confusion. "My work emails? Why?" "I just want to make sure there's nothing else," I said smoothly. "You said it was over with Tom, but I need to know for sure." Jessica hesitated, glancing around the room like she was searching for a way out. I could see the panic rising in her eyes. "Dave, there's nothing there," she said, her voice shaky. "I told you, it's over. I haven't talked to him in weeks." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, waiting. She stood up slowly, clearly reluctant. "Fine," she mumbled. "But I'm telling you, you're not going to find anything." She went to get her laptop, and I followed her into the den. She sat down at the table, opened it up, and logged into her work email. I could see her hands shaking as she typed, but she kept glancing up at me, trying to read my face.
I stayed silent, just watching her. Letting her dig her own grave. Once she had her email open, she slid the laptop over to me, her face pale. "See," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper.
"There's nothing."
I took the laptop and started scrolling. It didn't take long to find the emails she'd sent to Tom. She'd deleted most of them, of course, but she wasn't as careful as she thought. I found a few, buried in the archives, where they talked about meeting up during lunch breaks.
One of them was from just a week ago.
I looked up at her, my expression hard.
"You lied," I said flatly. Jessica's face crumpled.
She burst into tears, sobbing into her hands. I'm so sorry," she wailed.
"I didn't mean to. I didn't know how to stop it.
Please, Dave, please don't do this."
But I was done. Done pretending, done caring.
"I want a divorce," I said, standing up and closing the laptop with a snap. "And trust me, Jessica. You're not going to like how this plays out." Her sobs only grew louder as I turned and walked out of the room.
I didn't even look back. It was time to set everything in motion. Tom.
The bastard who'd been smiling in my face for years, shaking my hand, sharing beers with me, playing soccer every week while sneaking around behind my back with my wife.
He wasn't going to get off easy either.
As much as I hated Jessica for what she did, there was no way I was letting him walk away without paying for his part in it.
Revenge on her was personal, yes, but Tom? That was another level.
This guy had been a part of my life for so long that the betrayal felt deeper, more calculated. I mean, I trusted him. I'd even defended him when people said he was a bit of a sleaze. Turns out, everyone else was right, and I'd been the idiot. I wasn't just going to confront him and yell a bit, I wanted to rip apart everything he held dear, the same way he'd helped rip apart my marriage. The first thing I needed to do was gather more ammunition. Sure, I had all the messages between him and Jessica, but I wanted to be absolutely sure I had a full view of his life before I made my move. If this guy was bold enough to cheat with my wife, who knew what else he was hiding? I started by looking into his online presence, social media accounts, LinkedIn, everything I could find that was publicly available. His Facebook was mostly private, but it didn't take long to connect the dots. I scrolled through old photos, laughing bitterly when I saw ones of him and Jessica at barbecues, all smiles like nothing was wrong. But then I saw something else, his family. I'd forgotten how close he was to his sister. They lived in the same city, and from the looks of it, they were tight. Family vacations, Christmases together, all the usual stuff. Tom didn't have a wife, but his sister, Rachel, was clearly someone important to him.
I knew then that she was going to be part of this.
He cared about her, and that meant I had leverage. Next, I dug deeper into his professional life. He worked for a small, well-regarded marketing firm, which was actually how he and Jessica had crossed paths more often in recent years. His role was significant there, part of their management team. But what I didn't expect to find was just how many corners he'd cut to climb up the ladder. There were whispers about him at work, rumors that I wouldn't have paid attention to before all this happened. He was slick, no doubt, but he was sloppy too. I found out through some quiet digging around that he'd been fudging numbers on client reports. Nothing massive, but enough to inflate the firm's revenue estimates and make it look like he was closing bigger deals than he actually was. And since he managed the reports, no one else was double-checking his work. They trusted him, just like I had. By this point, I had a pretty clear picture of who Tom was. A liar, a cheat, and an opportunist. Now, it was time to hit him where it hurt. First, I set up a meeting with his boss. I knew a guy who worked at Tom's firm, and a few calls later, I had a sit-down scheduled under the pretense of discussing some potential business deal for my company. When I walked into that office, I had my poker face on. We went through the usual pleasantries, talking shop for a bit, before I subtly shifted the conversation. "You know, I've heard some interesting things about your guy Tom," I said, leaning back in my chair.
His boss looked intrigued but not alarmed yet. "Yeah? What kind of things?" "Well, let's just say I've been hearing about some creative accounting going on."
I have a friend who works with your team, and it sounds like there's been some, manipulation of the numbers to make deals look bigger than they are. The boss's face changed immediately, concern, doubt.
Are you sure about this? He asked, clearly not wanting to believe it.
Oh, I'm sure, I said, pulling out my phone. I had screenshots of some internal documents Tom had been playing around with, sent to me by my contact at the firm. This is just the tip of the iceberg. You might want to take a closer look at his work. The boss sat there, stunned, as I slid the phone across the table for him to see. He stared at the screen, processing what I'd just shown him. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, realizing that Tom wasn't the golden boy he thought he was. Thanks for bringing this to my attention, he finally said, his tone cold. I could tell this was going to be the start of Tom's downfall at work. His boss wasn't the type to let this slide, and I knew that once the firm started looking into his work, they'd find enough to sink him.
But that wasn't enough for me. I wasn't just interested in taking away his job. I wanted him to feel the kind of personal pain I'd felt. That's where his sister came in. Rachel was one of those people who thought her brother could do no wrong. She'd always looked up to him, always defended him whenever someone criticized him. So, I made sure she got the full picture of who her brother really was. I didn't send her everything at once. No, that would have been too easy.
I started with a message from a burner account, sending her a few of the more harmless texts between Tom and Jessica, enough to make her suspicious but not enough to overwhelm her right away. She responded almost immediately, asking who I was and why I was sending this to her. I ignored her for a while, letting the tension build.
Then I sent her more texts that were a little more explicit.
Ones where they talked about sneaking around, planning meetups. Rachel's responses grew more frantic as she pieced together what was happening.
She clearly didn't know how to handle it. Finally, I sent her the worst of it. The photos. The intimate conversations. The stuff that made it crystal clear just how deep her brother's betrayal ran. Rachel's last message to me was just one word: why? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By the time I was done, Tom's relationship with his sister was shattered. I could only imagine the conversations they'd had, the fallout from her finding out what kind of person her brother really was. Now, it was time for the final piece of the plan. I waited until Tom's world had started to crumble, until his job was on the line and his sister had cut ties with him, before I made my move. I confronted him on the soccer field. He didn't see it coming. We were warming up for our usual Saturday game, just like any other week, but this time, I had no intention of playing nice. "Hey, Tom," I said casually, walking up to him as he stretched on the sidelines. He looked up and gave me his usual grin, completely clueless. "Dave." "What's up, man?" he said, like nothing was wrong. I stared at him for a moment, not saying anything. Then I pulled out my phone and showed him the messages. His grin disappeared in an instant. His face went pale as he realized what I was showing him. "Wah! What the hell is this?" he stammered, taking a step back. "You tell me, Tom," I said coldly. "You've been screwing my wife. You thought I wouldn't find out?" He started to stutter some lame excuses, trying to deny it, but I wasn't having any of it. I stepped closer, getting right in his face. "You're done, Tom," I hissed. "I've already made sure of that." "Your job?" "Gone." "Your sister?" "She knows everything. And trust me, this is just the beginning. You're going to lose everything, just like I did." Tom's face twisted in panic, but he didn't say anything. He knew there was nothing he could do. I'd already taken control of the situation, and he was powerless to stop it. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in shock, his life unraveling before his eyes. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: satisfaction. Tom wasn't going to get away with what he'd done. He was going to feel every bit of pain I'd felt, and then some. And that was just the start. The house felt empty when I got home after destroying Tom's life on the soccer field. It was quiet, like the calm before a storm. Jessica was in the living room, curled up on the couch, her eyes red from crying.
She'd been like that a lot lately, crying, apologizing, begging for us to work things out. At first, I found it pathetic, almost satisfying to see her break down like that.
But now?
It was just exhausting. I was tired of all the emotions, tired of the anger, the sadness, the constant back and forth in my head about what I should do. Part of me wanted to throw her out and never look back. The other part wanted to know why. Why she did it. Why she risked everything for a guy like Tom, someone who clearly wasn't worth it. I hadn't given her any answers about where we stood since the confrontation in the kitchen. I let her stew in her own guilt, hoping it might drive home just how badly she'd screwed up. But now, after everything I'd done to Tom, after turning his life upside down, I knew I had to finish this. It was time for the last conversation.
I walked into the living room and sat down across from her.
Jessica looked up at me, her eyes wide and hopeful, like she thought maybe I was ready to forgive her.
I wasn't. I wasn't even close.
We need to talk, I said, my voice flat. I was done pretending to care, done playing the part of the understanding husband. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater.
I know, she whispered. I don't know where to start.
I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms.
How about you start with why, Jessica? Why him? Why now? What the hell were you thinking?
She winced at the harshness in my voice, but I didn't care.
I wasn't here to make her feel better.
I don't know, she said, her voice shaking.
It just happened. We were talking, and things got out of hand.
I didn't mean for it to go as far as it did. I stared at her, disbelief flooding through me.
You didn't mean for it to go this far?
You were sending him photos, Jessica. You were planning meetups. Don't give me that "it just happened" bullshit. She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling in her lap.
I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. Hurt me? I snapped. You didn't just hurt me, Jessica. You destroyed everything. You threw away our life, our marriage, for what? Some cheap thrill with Tom? She didn't say anything.
She just sat there, looking miserable, her tears silently falling again. I shook my head, disgusted.
Was it worth it? Was he worth it?
No, she sobbed.
It wasn't worth it. I was stupid. I was lonely. You've been so distant lately, and I.
Don't you dare blame me for this, I cut her off. Don't you dare try to make this my fault.
I'm not, she cried, her voice breaking. I'm not trying to blame you. I know I messed up. I know it's my fault. I don't know what I was thinking.
I stood up, pacing the room, trying to keep my anger in check. I'd heard enough of her excuses. I didn't care about her loneliness or whatever reason she had for cheating.
None of it justified what she did.
You had a choice, I said, turning to face her again.
You could have talked to me. You could have told me you were unhappy. But instead, you went behind my back. You betrayed me. Do you know what that feels like, Jessica? To be betrayed by the person you thought you could trust the most?
She nodded, tears streaming down her face.
I know.
I'm so sorry, Dave.
I really am. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said coldly. Sorry doesn't erase what you did.
Jessica sobbed harder, covering her face with her hands. I could see her breaking down, falling apart in front of me, but it didn't make me feel any better.
If anything, it just made me feel worse.
Because no matter how much she cried, no matter how many times she apologized, nothing could change the fact that she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I sat back down, the exhaustion of the past few weeks weighing heavily on me. I felt drained, like I had nothing left to give. I'd already torn Tom's life apart, and now, here I was, sitting across from the woman I once loved, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. I can't forgive you, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm.
I don't think I ever will.
Jessica's breath hitched, and she looked up at me, her face pale.
Dave, please.
I'm filing for divorce, I interrupted her, the words spilling out of my mouth before I could stop them. I'd thought about it for weeks, but this was the first time I'd said it out loud. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at me, her eyes wide with shock, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. But nothing came out. I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that this was real. That it was over. "Dave, no, please," she finally choked out. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy, we can work on things." "I don't want to work on it," I said, cutting her off again. "I'm done, Jessica. I can't do this anymore." She shook her head frantically, reaching out for me, but I pulled away. I couldn't let her touch me. Not after everything that had happened. "Please, Dave," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. I love you. I know I messed up, but I love you. We can get through this." I laughed bitterly. "You love me? Is that what you call love, Jessica? Sneaking around behind my back? Lying to my face for months? You don't love me. You don't even know what love is." "I do," she cried. "I do love you. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. But that doesn't mean we can't fix this." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "There's nothing left to fix," I said quietly. "You broke us. And now, it's over." Jessica's sobs filled the room again, but I didn't feel anything anymore. No anger, no sadness. Just nothing. I was numb. "I'll give you time to figure out where you're going to stay," I said, standing up. "But I want you out by the end of the month." "Dave, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Please don't do this." But I was already walking away. I couldn't sit there any longer, listening to her beg for something that was never going to happen. I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, the room we had shared for years, and started packing a bag. I wasn't going to stay here tonight. I couldn't. As I threw some clothes into the bag, my mind drifted to the life we'd built together. The memories we shared. The love I thought we had. It all felt like a distant dream now, something that belonged to someone else. Not me. Not anymore. When I was done, I slung the bag over my shoulder and headed back downstairs. Jessica was still in the living room, curled up on the couch, sobbing quietly to herself. I didn't say anything as I passed her. I just walked out the door and into the night. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't coming back. Not to this life. Not to her. As I got in the car and drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. But even as I drove through the empty streets, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, what now? What do I do with my life now that everything I thought I had is gone? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that whatever came next, it wouldn't include Jessica. The first night away from home felt like stepping into a new world. I didn't go far, just booked a room at a cheap hotel on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me space. That's what I needed most right then: space to think, space to breathe, space to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dull, patterned wallpaper and feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. It was done. I'd told Jessica I wanted a divorce, told her to leave, and walked out. Now I was sitting in a room that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, trying to wrap my head around the fact that my marriage, everything I thought my life was over. I should have felt something. Sadness, anger, relief, anything. But all I felt was empty. Numb. Like there was nothing left inside me after everything that had happened. I wasn't sad anymore, not really. And the rage I'd felt for weeks? That was gone, too. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd ruined Tom's life, and Jessica's wasn't far behind. But even after all that, I didn't feel better. I didn't feel anything. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about how everything had fallen apart so quickly. One minute, I thought I had a solid life, a future with my wife, a family. The next, I was alone in some dingy hotel, my marriage in pieces, and I didn't know what the hell to do with myself. The divorce was inevitable. I wasn't going to change my mind, no matter how much Jessica begged and pleaded. I couldn't go back. But that didn't mean I knew how to move forward either. I didn't know who I was without her. We'd been married for almost a decade. She had been part of everything, part of my daily routine, part of my plans, part of my identity. Now she was just gone. What was I supposed to do with that? I closed my eyes, trying to shut it all out. But the thoughts kept coming. They wouldn't stop. They circled around in my head, asking the same questions over and over. Why didn't I see it? Why didn't I catch the signs? How did I miss the fact that my wife was sleeping with one of my friends for months? There were no good answers. None that made sense, anyway. I knew I couldn't stay in that hotel room forever. I needed to figure out what came next. So, the next morning, after a night of tossing and turning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Jessica had already taken enough from me. She didn't get to take my future, too. I called my lawyer first thing, setting up a meeting to start the divorce process. I wasn't going to drag it out or get caught up in emotional back and forth. I wanted it done, clean, quick. We had joint assets, mostly the house, some savings, but I'd already started moving money out of our accounts. I was ready to protect myself, and I wasn't going to let Jessica get her hands on more than she deserved. The lawyer laid it all out for me, how long the process would take, what to expect. I listened, but my mind was elsewhere. It was hard to focus on the details when all I could think about was how my entire life had been thrown into chaos. "Do you have any other requests?" the lawyer asked, pulling me back to reality. I paused, thinking for a moment. "I want the house," I said finally. "She's the one who cheated. She's the one who should leave." The lawyer nodded. "We can push for that. With the evidence you have, it should be straightforward." The evidence. That was the part that stung the most. I had all the proof I needed, Jessica's texts, the photos, everything. But what I didn't have was any explanation that made sense. Sure, she'd said she was lonely, that I'd been distant. But those were just excuses. They didn't really explain why she did it, why she risked everything for a guy like Tom. But maybe that was just something I'd never understand. After the meeting, I went back to the hotel and sat there for a while, staring at my phone. I hadn't spoken to Jessica since I'd walked out, and I wasn't planning to anytime soon. But I knew I needed to figure out what the next steps were. We still had to talk about the house, about the logistics of the divorce, about everything. And as much as I hated it, I couldn't avoid her forever. So, I sent her a text. "We need to talk about the divorce. I'll be home tomorrow evening. Be ready to go over the details." I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. But that was fine. I didn't need her to respond. I just needed her to know that this was happening, whether she liked it or not. The next day, I drove back to the house. It felt strange pulling into the driveway, knowing that this place, the place we'd built together, the place that had once felt like home, wasn't mine anymore. Not really. It was just another casualty of Jessica's betrayal. When I walked inside, Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She looked up when she saw me, her face a mix of fear and sadness. I could tell she'd been waiting for this, dreading it, but knowing it was coming. "Dave," she started, her voice shaky. "Can we just?" "I'm not here to talk about us," I cut her off. "I'm here to talk about the divorce." She flinched but nodded. "Okay." I sat down across from her, pulling out the paperwork I'd brought with me. "I've already started the process with the lawyer," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "We'll go through the assets, divide them up. You'll have to leave the house. I'm keeping it." Jessica's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, her hands trembling as she reached for a tissue. I don't know where I'll go, she whispered. That's your problem, I said coldly. You should have thought about that before you screwed around with Tom. She winced again, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Dave. I really am. Sorry doesn't fix anything, I said, my voice flat. This is happening. Whether you're ready or not, it's happening. She didn't say anything else. She just sat there, crying quietly, as I went over the details with her. I laid everything out, how the assets would be divided, how the divorce would proceed. There was no room for negotiation. I wasn't giving her any more than I had to. When I was done, I stood up, gathering my things. You have until the end of the month to figure out where you're going to stay, I said. After that, I want you out. She nodded, still sobbing, but I didn't care. I was done feeling sorry for her. Done feeling anything for her, really. As I walked out of the house, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't a happy feeling, but it wasn't sadness either. It was just final. Like a chapter of my life had been closed, and now I had to figure out what came next. But as I drove away, one thought kept running through my mind: what now? What do I do now that everything I thought my life would be is gone? I didn't have the answer to that yet. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Like I could start figuring it out. The nightmare was over. The life I'd built with Jessica was gone, but I wasn't going to let that destroy me. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define the rest of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I was free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the heartbreak. Free to start over, to rebuild. And that? That was something I could live with.